Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a star rise straight out of the projects, bright enough to shake a whole city, only to be swallowed by the same streets that crowned her? Because that's what New Orleans witnessed. A girl from Magnolia, a voice built for block parties, a fire that bounced off the walls of every club from uptown to downtown. She didn't need permission. She didn't need polishing. She came into this world loud, raw, and unapologetic the way bounce music was meant to sound. They called her Magnolia Shorty. They called her the Queen of Bounce. And when she touched a mic, the room didn't just move. It erupted. Her voice was wild and fearless. Her lyrics were sharp enough to slice the air. Crowds shook under her rhythm. Women cheered for her. Men respected her. Kids looked up to her like she carried the whole spirit of New Orleans in her chest. But here's the part nobody wants to talk about. In a city built on culture, rhythm, faith, and joy, danger walks just as close. Talent doesn't guarantee safety. Fame doesn't guarantee protection. And dreams, especially in Magnolia, are fragile things. Magnolia Shorty climbed her way from project hallways to Cash Money studios. She beat every odd stacked against her. She survived heartbreak, betrayal, displacement, hurricanes, death around her, and a world that tried to silence women like her. She survived all that. But one December afternoon, in a gated community that was supposed to keep her safe, the bullets came anyway, and New Orleans lost one of its brightest daughters. This is her story. Not just how she lived, but how she loved, how she fought, how she rose, and how the world failed to protect her when she needed it most. Magnolia Shorty came into this world on a warm September morning in the early Nung Num Tum Moi, right in the heart of New Orleans. And not just anywhere, she was raised inside the Magnolia Projects, a place as legendary as it was dangerous. Those buildings held music, joy, heartbreak, gunfire, community, and chaos all at once. Growing up there meant growing up fast. Growing up there meant you learned rhythm before you learned safety. Her father was a musician who traveled across Louisiana, playing keys and singing behind artists whose names filled jukeboxes across the state. That talent, that electric pulse, it lived in her blood long before she ever held a mic. But life at home wasn't easy. After her parents split, everything became heavier. Bills, fear, silence. That's when music stopped being a hobby and became a lifeline. She started writing raps before she even knew what fame was. Just a little girl with a pen, rhyming through her feelings, turning every wound into a verse. Her mother noticed something in her, a spark, a hunger, and bought her a small tape recorder so she could hear herself. Night after night, she filled those tapes. Practicing, rewinding, practicing again. She wasn't just trying to be good, she was trying to survive. With her cousin, Katie Black, beside her, she started performing at house parties, cookouts, neighborhood gatherings, anywhere people would listen. And when she touched the mic, something shifted. The shy girl disappeared. A star stepped forward. People started talking. That little shorty girl can rap. That shorty girl got something. And in a city like New Orleans, word travels fast. One of the first people to see her greatness up close was Soulja Slim, back when he was still calling himself Magnolia Slim. Slim had a way of recognizing rawness, maybe because he carried so much of it himself. He gave her the name Magnolia Shorty, a name that would later echo across the South like a drumline. Slim took her to Hype Enough Records to try to get her signed, and even though she was still in middle school, people already treated her like she belonged in the booth. Another childhood friend, BG from Cash Money, introduced her to Baby and Slim. They saw the same thing everyone else saw, the fire, the attitude, the talent, and signed her when she was only a young girl. Barely old enough to understand contracts, but more than old enough to know who she wanted to be. Cash Money gave her a home, Manny Fresh gave her the sound, and Magnolia Shorty gave them something they hadn't had before, a wild, fearless female voice made for the bounce movement. The first time she recorded Monkey on the Stick, she knocked it out in one take, one breath, one moment, and it became a hood anthem overnight. Radios played it, clubs blasted it, parties shook under it. She didn't just enter the game, she set it on fire. People started calling her the Queen of Bounce. And she didn't shy away from that crown. She carried it like she'd been born with it. The hair, the nails, the energy, the voice. Her presence was pure New Orleans, loud, bold, beautiful, dangerous, and alive. And even as a teenager, she had something rare, the kind of star power that doesn't need a stage to shine. When Magnolia Shorty stepped fully into the world, It felt like New Orleans exhaled a little louder. Bounce was already bubbling in the streets, thick bass lines, call and response chants, the kind of energy that made whole neighborhoods move at once. But Shorty carried something different. She brought a woman's force into a sound dominated by men, and she did it without flinching, without softening, without asking for permission. Cash Money put her in the studio with Manny Fresh, the architect behind some of the wildest beats the city had ever heard. And with that one take of Monkey on the Stick, she didn't just join the bounce movement, she detonated it. Her delivery was raw, sexual, playful, aggressive. Every line felt like a dare, and every dare made the crowd louder. DJs spun her record like it was gasoline. Clubs erupted, block parties cracked open. Her voice became the soundtrack of summer nights and sweaty dance floors from the Magnolia to the 7th Ward. She was young, too young for the weight of fame, but she carried it like she'd been born ready. Everywhere she went, people shouted her name, girls copied her style, dudes respected her pen, and Cash Money treated her like family. Baby, especially, protected her the way an older brother would protect the one person in the neighborhood with too much shine to walk alone. Their bond was that close. Life started moving fast, faster than any teenager could prepare for. She married her high school sweetheart, Carl Bridgewater, a boy who had known her before the lights, before the applause, before the noise. For a moment, everything aligned, career rising, home solid, city behind her. She saw a future no longer built from survival, but from possibility. But timing is a cruel thing. Just when her flame burned brightest, the world around her began to shift. Cash Money exploded into national fame. Juvenile blew up. Wayne blew up. BG blew up. Turk joined the Hot Boys, and the label grew into a powerhouse. Universal came in. Millions came in. The spotlight widened, but somehow Shorty slipped into the shadows. She stepped away for reasons she never fully explained, saying only that something came up and she had to disappear for a while. And when she finally came back, the landscape had changed. Cash Money was no longer the small family she entered. It was a machine, bigger, louder, faster. Then came the heartbreak that shook the whole city. Soldier Slim, her childhood friend, the man who named her, the spirit who understood her grind better than anyone, was murdered the night before Thanksgiving. Shorty didn't just lose a friend. She lost a piece of her beginning, the first person who ever said out loud that she was destined for greatness. That wound stayed open long after the funeral ended. But even wounds can spark rebirth. Shorty picked herself up, stepped back into the booth, and tried to reclaim the voice the city once crowned. She returned with hunger, with grit, with the same fire she carried as a kid rapping at cookouts. But New Orleans was about to face a catastrophe that would drown dreams far bigger than hers. Hurricane Katrina arrived with a rage that felt biblical. The water swallowed neighborhoods. Families were torn apart. Thousands died. The city she loved, the city that made her nearly disappeared. Shorty survived, but survival came with its own scars. She watched friends scatter across the South. She watched her culture float away. She watched her home drown. And yet, even then, she held on to the music, held on to her city, held on to the idea that bounce, her bounce, could rise again. She didn't know it yet, but the comeback she was building would take her to stages across the South and straight into the path of danger she never saw coming. When the waters of Katrina finally receded, New Orleans was not the same city Magnolia Shorty had grown up in. The streets were cracked open, families were displaced, and the culture that once pulsed through every block felt scattered across the South. Shorty, like thousands of others, moved between Texas, Atlanta, Houston, Memphis, anywhere the evacuees landed. But even in exile, she carried New Orleans inside her chest. And when promoters realized she was performing again, calls began to pour in. She hit stages with a hunger she hadn't felt in years. Some nights she did nearly a dozen shows back to back, chasing the same rush she had as a young girl in the Magnolia courtyard. Crowds screamed her name again. Bounce kids treated her like royalty. In cities full of New Orleans refugees, she wasn't just an artist, she was home. Females in rap were rising nationwide. Missy, Eve, Trina, Remy. A new wave of women claiming their space. Shorty felt the momentum and pushed harder. She began working on a second solo album, Miss Bossy, doing it independently, managing herself, booking her own shows, moving without a label machine behind her. The freedom lit something in her, a confidence that she could build her name again, her way. She reconnected with Miss T, the first woman ever signed to Cash Money, and the two planned a joint album under the name Gutter Girls. They were ready to bring female bounce back to the forefront. Everything felt possible. Everything felt close. But the streets have a way of pulling even the brightest stars into their storms. Shorty kept performing, kept traveling, kept hustling, but danger lived everywhere she went. Bounce music was fun, wild, sweaty, but the neighborhoods that birthed it were filled with old wounds, gang feuds, old scores, waiting to be settled. And sometimes, just being near the wrong person was enough to put your life at risk. She tried to be a mentor, tried to help younger artists who didn't have the support she once had from Cash Money. One of those artists was a young man named Jerome Man Hampton, freshly out of jail, trying to make sense of the world again. People warned her, family warned her. They told her his past was heavy, that he carried enemies, that danger walked behind him like a shadow. But Shorty had a soft spot, the kind of heart that believed everybody deserved another shot. She didn't know how many eyes were watching him, or how many guns were waiting. As her name started buzzing again, her voice began reaching new ears. She won awards at underground shows back home. She stepped onto the stage at the South by Southwest Festival, proving she could stand next to any artist in the country. She appeared on singles with rising R&B names. She landed a spot on the remix to a Jadakiss song, a move that could have pushed her into a bigger lane than Bounce alone. The comeback was real. The momentum was real. But so was the danger. Because in New Orleans, success can make you a target just as quickly as it makes you a star. And with every show, every flight, every late-night studio session, Shorty was walking closer and closer to a moment. She would never walk back from a moment where loyalty, kindness, and timing fused into tragedy. Soon, she would enter a gated community meant to protect her and find herself trapped in the one place she could not escape. When the news broke that Magnolia Shorty had been gunned down inside her car 5 days before Christmas, the shock rippled far beyond New Orleans. In a city used to tragedy, this one still felt different. It wasn't just another headline about violence. It wasn't just another name added to the long list of lives taken too soon. This was Magnolia Shorty, the daughter of a city, the queen of bounce, the girl who carried the sound of New Orleans on her tongue like a battle cry. Across the South, across the bounce community, across the neighborhoods rebuilt after Katrina, people fell silent. Radio hosts choked up on air. DJs played her songs back to back. Old-school Cash Money fans shook their heads in disbelief. Younger kids who grew up hearing her voice at block parties felt a strange kind of grief, losing someone they never met but always felt close to. America reacted the way it always does, when the violence becomes too loud to ignore. Commentators blamed the streets. Politicians blamed the neighborhoods. Outsiders blamed a culture they didn't understand. But inside New Orleans, the real New Orleans, the conversations were softer, deeper, heavier. People talked about how hard it is to escape the things you grew up around. How even in a gated community, danger can slip in through the cracks. How kindness, loyalty, and wanting to help the wrong person can cost you everything. Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a brutal reminder of the world so many black artists navigate every day, where talent shines but violence lurks close, waiting for the smallest opening. Women in hip-hop felt the sting even sharper. Magnolia Shorty had fought for her place in a world that didn't always make room for women, especially women from the projects. She carved her path with attitude, courage, humor, and a voice that refused to be small. Her murder wasn't just the loss of an artist. It was the loss of proof that a woman from Magnolia could climb her way up and drag her culture into the spotlight with her. And then came the grief that hit hardest: her family, her husband. The girls who grew up looking up to her, the young artists she mentored, the people she made laugh, the ones she encouraged, the community she lifted every time she walked on stage. New Orleans didn't just lose a rapper, it lost a piece of itself, a heartbeat that helped the city dance through pain. In the months that followed, conversations spread about rebuilding community safety, about supporting young artists, about not letting the darkest parts of the city swallow its brightest lights. And when Drake sampled her voice on a record that became the biggest song in the country, it wasn't just homage, it was resurrection. It was the world being reminded of a woman the streets tried to erase. Because legends don't disappear. Not when a city remembers them. Not when a culture keeps their name alive. Not when their voice still echoes through the speakers years after they're gone. Some stories don't close cleanly. Some stories don't offer justice, or clarity, or comfort. Some stories simply remain heavy, unfinished, echoing through the hallways of a city that remembers every sound. Magnolia Shorty's life is one of those stories. Not because she was perfect, not because fame promised her safety, but because she carried a fire the world wasn't ready to protect. She rose from the Magnolia Projects with nothing but her voice, her courage, and the rhythm that lived in her bones. She stood in rooms where no girl her age was supposed to stand. She carved her name into a genre that wasn't built for women, and she did it with a smile sharp enough to cut through any doubt. Her bounce wasn't just music, it was survival turned into celebration. It was New Orleans turned into sound. But the truth is simple. Dreams come from fragile places, and even the brightest ones can be taken in an instant. Some people will look at her story and only see the violence at the end. Some will only see the headlines. But the people who knew her, the block parties, the fans, the DJs, the evacuees she lifted after Katrina, the young artists she guided, they remember her laughter. They remember her fight. They remember the girl who refused to shrink. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause. Magnolia Shorty left behind more than records. She left a heartbeat, a blueprint, proof that a girl from a forgotten corner of New Orleans could rise loud enough to shake the whole South. Proof that talent doesn't need permission. Proof that even when the world turns dark, a voice can still cut through it. To anyone out there who has ever felt trapped between danger and destiny, we see you. To every woman fighting to be heard in a world built to mute, you keep going. To every artist carrying a city on your back, breathe, then rise again. If her story touched you, tell it forward. Share her music, honor her name. Keep her voice alive the way New Orleans always meant it to be: bold, wild, unforgettable. Thank you for listening. Rest in power, Magnolia Shorty, the queen who left the beat inside all of us.